All right. Hello, hello. I want to try to get a quick lecture out. Remember, you have an exam Tuesday, Advanced U.S. History, third block. It will be all multiple choice. Please do your best. Take your time on it and let's review because, again, it's worth 20% of your third 9 weeks grade. It can be really good. Okay. So standard one is Colonial America. Okay. Remember the word mercantilism? Mercantilism is an economic theory that it's basically the reason why so many European countries wanted to colonize around the world. It's the idea of the mother country wants to expand and establish little colonies, and whatever the raw materials are on those colonies, they ship it back to the mother country, and then the mother country will then manufacture whatever it is and send it and sell it to the colonies. Do you see that favorable balance of trade? The mother country gets to call the shots, and it's the idea that if a European country owns that little colony, that means no one else can own it, okay? And it's just all about that worldwide competition. Mercantilism is a huge reason why Spain and England and France, there's the three we talk about, really colonize. It's all about the money. We also know the southern colonies, all about agriculture. We only talked about one major southern colony, Jamestown, Virginia. Remember, it was established in 1607, and it was established by the Virginia Company. King James I gave a charter to the Virginia Company as a business. It was a joint stock company, okay? And the Virginia Company brought only men at this time, and all they did was look for gold. Okay. And remember, they didn't practice survival skills at all. And right when they're about to basically die out, John Smith steps in and he says, if you don't work, you won't eat. This community effort, and he changes it around. Okay. John Smith decides to work really well with the Powhatan Native Americans, and they teach him and the settlers how to fish and hunt, and garden and stuff, and things are better. Then you have John Rolfe, who is the tobacco guy. He is the guy who grows that special tobacco, which makes lots of money for, this Virginia, and leads to that plantation economy with lots of acres. And then it'll lead to indentured servants, that will work on the land for 4 to 7 years. Okay. We also know that the government in Jamestown, Virginia was the House of Burgesses. It's the first representative legislative democracy in the New World, period. And, so that's really cool. And remember, only the wealthy were Burgesses or representatives. Okay. Let's see. The New England Colonies. Remember, reasons established: religious freedom. The Pilgrims were discriminated against, and Pilgrims are Puritans. Religious reasons, okay? Remember the Native Americans with the New England colonies. Basically, the Native Americans felt threatened of land encroachment, the settlers, taking over. So there's a couple of wars. There's the Pequot War, which has to do with land encroachment, and the Puritans are going to win. And then you have King Philip's War about 30 years later, has to do with land encroachment. And guess what? The Puritans are going to win too. Okay. Land encroachment and a clash of cultures are the main two reasons for a war there. Okay. Economic development. Up north in the New England colonies, very rocky soil, so you can't really grow too much. You're not going to grow cash crops like in the South. You might grow enough subsistence farming, which is like just enough to survive, So instead, because of the geographies of rocky soil and all that kind of stuff, they're going to start making things. So like building ships, making rum, fishing, okay? Building ships or boats, okay? Making things, industry. Also, we have the Mid-Atlantic colonies, which are known as the Middle Colonies. Reasons established, okay? Remember, the Mid-Atlantic colonies is like in the middle of the Atlantic, so it's a great location, good harbors, ports. If you went straight across, you'd get like to England, basically. So it's a great location for trade. We know that Pennsylvania is inside of the Middle or Mid-Atlantic colonies, and that was created to create a refuge for those Quakers there, and they're very tolerant of other, very nice to natives. Go Quakers. Okay. Economic development, because it was a big port and trade. You did have some shipbuilding there as well. So up north and at the Mid-Atlantic, you had shipbuilding. And then like in Pennsylvania, I remember it's a bread basket. Okay, standard 2. We know that the Middle Passage, part of that transatlantic trade, the triangular trade, this is the voyage, the horrible voyage, where Africans are going from Africa to the Americas. Okay, very important there. We know the African culture made a lot of contributions: sweet potatoes, watermelons, banjos, shotgun house. Okay, self-governance. Okay, we talked about the House of Burgesses. Okay, salutary neglect. Remember mercantilism and the Navigation Acts? We talked about that. But the reality was those trade laws, the Navigation Acts, were not really being enforced. Okay, and that's called salutary neglect. So here are the rules, but we're not going to really enforce them. That's called salutary neglect. Okay. Also, especially in New England, there's a movement that will start as a religious revival. What is it called? The First Great Awakening. Think about like Jonathan Edwards, Sinners of the Hands of an Angry God. You know, you're the spider and he's holding you, God's holding you over the fire. And as long as you ask God into your heart and repent of your sins, you're good, you're safe, meaning you're going to heaven. Okay, standard 3. The French Indian War, 1763. Okay, that's when it ends. Remember, the French Indian War, it's about England and France fighting over who could dominate North America, specifically with the Ohio River Valley. Long story short, Great Britain wins and gets to dominate North America. Okay. Also, there's the war debt, which leads to the taxes and policies and the end of salutary neglect. So now we have the Proclamation of 1763. These soldiers fought in the war. They're ready to move on, get their land. And then Parliament says, no, we don't want you fighting with natives there. And so you can't settle west of the Appalachian Mountains. Okay. Then you have the Stamp Act. Remember, the Stamp Act was a tax on paper documents. And people are upset because no taxation without representation. No one is a colonial member of Parliament. We don't have a say-so. As a result, the Sons of Liberty will form to protest the Stamp Act. They'll tar and feather stamp agents. Okay. The Daughters of Liberty will form too at that time. We talked about them with the Townsend duties, where they boycotted tea and they made their own clothing. Okay. You have the Camisa Correspondence, which was the secret writing letter group that, secretly and continually linked the colonies without England knowing. And then you have the Intolerable Acts. This is in response to the Boston Tea Party. This allows England to be even more in debt. And so they're going to make the colonist situation intolerable or unbearable. It's a punishment. Remember, they closed down the port of Boston. You had that Quartering Act. Okay, all these crazy things. And that, I think, is what made people so mad they decided to meet the First Continental Congress. Okay. So standard 4. We know that eventually there will be the shot heard around the world, Lexington and Concord. Okay. Then you have George Washington will be named the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, the Colonial Army. January of 1776, Thomas Paine publishes Common Sense, which, again, 'tis time to part, trying to convince the colonists that, hey, if your mother country is fighting you and shooting you, declare independence. Okay. Well, do we listen? Yes, we do. The Second Continental Congress will write, remember that Committee of Five? That's the group responsible for drafting and editing the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Edison. Oh my God. Thomas Jefferson is the author. And then you have other members of the Committee of Five, like Ben Franklin and John Adams, who are, editors, if you will. And it will get adopted. But again, it doesn't mean anything. Okay. It's just saying, hey, we want to be free. So let's talk about this. We know that the Continental Army is constantly out of supplies. And we know that Trenton, the Battle of Trenton, is a great example. That's a moral or a morale booster. That's the one that Christmas night crossing the Delaware River, surprising those drunk German Hessians. It's a big America moment. Then you have the Battle of Saratoga. The reason why Saratoga is so important is because it results in France forming an alliance with us. Remember, Ben Franklin And Lafayette convinced France, King Louis XVI, to help us out. And now we have supplies and we have an ally. Okay. Then you have Valley Forge, which was a really tough time. Remember the starvation, the smallpox. It was that winter camp for the Colonial Army. That's where, when it gets to be spring, Baron von Steuben is ordered in by Washington, and he actually trains the Continental Army. Pretty expert there. And then you have, let's see, Yorktown. Yorktown is that surrender battle. Remember the peninsula, and Cornwallis, the British guy, is surrounded on land by Washington's men and then surrounded by water with the French fleet. So that's the last major battle. What is the treaty that ends the American Revolution and thus gives us our independence? Treaty of Paris, 1783. Okay, last standard. Standard 5. We know the first constitution that outlines our government, the Articles of Confederation. Okay. We know it had lots of problems. It basically gave almost all the power to the states. Like Congress could create laws, but remember, there was no executive branch to enforce the laws. So the laws really don't mean anything. Two good things, though, out of the articles would be those land ordinances. Remember, the land ordinance divided up the land into townships and you could buy land. The Northwest ordinance told you how territories could become a state. You know, once you had 60,000 people, you couldn't allow slavery, that kind of stuff. So the Articles of Confederation will come to a boiling point with Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion, remember, that's like the farmer lost his property. And so he and his other farmers will storm and surround multiple courthouses in Massachusetts. So people can't get evicted and their land foreclosed on. And it lasted forever because the governor of Massachusetts wrote letters to all the other governors saying, please help us, send your state militias. And every single state was like, not my problem. Okay, that's why it lasted a lot longer. So then people like Hamilton said, look, Shays' Rebellion shouldn't have lasted that long. We need to secretly meet and create a new constitution, hence the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Okay. Remember, part of that is the Great Compromise, which set up a two-house Congress, House of Representatives, Senate. It also determined, the census would determine the population every 10 years. We know about the Great Compromise, which talked about, slaves being kind of 3/5 in the state's population. We know about federalism, where the states have certain rights and the federal government has certain powers, and they have some shared powers too. And, the federal government is a limited government because of checks and balances. And like, there's some things that the state can do that the federal government can't do. Okay. And the Constitution is just a piece of paper until it's ratified. So this is going to, once it's, signed, doesn't mean anything until it's ratified. And so this leads to the debate of should the Constitution be ratified? You'll have the Federalists who say, yes, we need law and order and a stronger central government. And then you'll have the Anti-Federalists who are like, no, we don't want the federal government to get too strong and be like England Part 2 to us. Okay. So there'll be some debates, and Hamilton and James Madison and John Jay will kind of take turns and secretly write a series of essays called the Federalist Essays. And the purpose was they were published in all these newspapers to convince people to support a stronger central government or support ratification of the Constitution. And what will convince the antis to be okay with this? Adding a Bill of Rights, which limits the powers of the federal government. The Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments or changes to the Constitution, and they're all about protecting your individual rights to make sure the federal government cannot infringe upon them and take them away. So that's standards 1 through 5, and that's the quick version. Okay, so make sure, hopefully you've taken some notes and you can attach some notes. And then I want to have a quizzes for you to do over these standards. And if you have anything like a notebook you need to work on or whatever, turn it in. Have a great weekend. Exam Tuesday.